Mom, could you maybe just pretend not to exist when our guests are here? My daughter, Caroline, didn't even look at me when she said it. Her eyes were fixed on the floral arrangement she was adjusting on the polished mahogany sideboard upstairs. The words, though softly spoken, landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. Pretend not to exist. As if her 75-year-old mother, relegated to the damp, musty basement below her feet, was nothing more than an inconvenient stain on her perfect life. A shameful secret to be hidden away. In that moment, standing awkwardly at the bottom of the basement stairs, clutching a worn cardigan around my shoulders against the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature, I realized it. To Caroline, I wasn't the woman who had taught her to ride her bicycle without training wheels, the one who'd packed her lunch every single school day for 12 years, the proud mother who had scrimped and saved to help her through college. No, I was just baggage, unwanted, unvalued, and utterly disposable. If you are listening to this story, thank you so much for being here. Let us know where you are joining us from in the world, and do not forget to subscribe to become part of our growing community. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it was only months, that I had a life I recognized. For 40 years, my husband Arthur and I had lived in a lovely little Cape Cod house on Maple Street. It wasn't grand, not like Caroline's sprawling colonial, but it was ours. Filled with sunlight, books, the lingering scent of Arthur's pipe tobacco, and decades of laughter and quiet companionship. I had poured my heart into teaching first graders for 35 years, eventually becoming the school principal. I loved the energy of the children, the smell of crayons and old paper, the satisfaction of seeing a little face light up with understanding. Arthur and I had been careful, planning for a comfortable retirement. We had savings, a pension, Social Security. Enough, we thought, to live out our days with dignity and independence after he passed 8 years ago. Then came the crash. Not the big one everyone talks about from 2008, though that certainly didn't help. No, my personal financial devastation came later, quieter, more insidious. It came in the form of a man named Mr. Sullivan, a financial advisor recommended by a friend from my bridge club. He was charming, confident, spoke of guaranteed returns and exclusive opportunities. He convinced me, foolishly, trustingly, to move a significant portion of my nest egg into what he called a high-yield private investment fund. It turned out to be a classic Ponzi scheme. By the time the checks stopped coming and the excuses started piling up, it was too late. Mr. Sullivan vanished, taking what was left of my life savings with him. Gone. Every penny I thought would keep me safe. The shame was a physical weight. How could I, a former school principal, someone who managed budgets and staff, have been so naive? Selling the house on Maple Street felt like tearing out a piece of my own heart. Each box packed, each piece of furniture sold or given away, was another painful reminder of my failure. 40 years of memories, reduced to a few sentimental items crammed into cardboard boxes. Caroline had offered me the basement. "Temporarily, of course, Mom," she'd said, her tone brisk, avoiding my eyes. "Just until you get back on your feet." Her husband, Richard, a finance director with cold eyes and an even colder smile, had been even less enthusiastic. He mostly ignored me except when handing me itemized bills for my share of the groceries and utilities, calculated down to the last kilowatt hour. So here I was. Gloria Reynolds, former educator, homeowner, financially independent widow, now living in a subterranean space that smelled faintly of mildew and regret. My bed was a narrow cot salvaged from their garage sale pile. My dresser was a stack of plastic crates. My only window looked out onto a concrete window well filled with dead leaves. Upstairs, I could hear the clinking of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the orchestrated laughter of Caroline's important friends enjoying a lavish dinner party. A party I was explicitly told to make myself scarce for. I sank onto the lumpy cot, pulling the thin blanket tighter. The sound of their oblivious celebration a mocking counterpoint to the hollow ache in my chest. I picked up the small, lacquered box from the crate beside my bed, one of the few things I couldn't bear to part with. Inside lay a handful of photographs, Arthur smiling on our wedding day, Caroline as a gap-toothed first grader holding up a drawing, me standing proudly outside the elementary school on my last day before retirement. Tears welled, blurring the images of a life that felt impossibly distant now. My confidence, my independence, my very sense of self, it had all been stripped away, leaving me feeling adrift and utterly alone in this cold, unwelcoming space. 3 months crawled by in a haze of quiet humiliation and enforced invisibility. My days bled into one another, marked only by the meals I ate alone downstairs, usually leftovers scraped onto a plate after Caroline and Richard had finished, and the careful calculations I made to stretch my meager Social Security check to cover their charges. Then came the evening of the big neighborhood gala, hosted at their house. Caroline was frantic, obsessed with everything being perfect. "Mom," she said, twisting a pearl earring into place, her reflection frowning back at her from the hall mirror. "Richard's boss is coming tonight. It's really important. Maybe it would be best if you just stayed downstairs. Don't use the kitchen or anything after 6, just to avoid any awkwardness." Avoid awkwardness, meaning avoid me. The request, though phrased more gently than usual, cut deeper than ever. I felt a familiar sting behind my eyes, but I blinked it back. "Of course, dear," I murmured. I wouldn't want to impose. That evening, as the first cars began pulling into the driveway, the basement felt smaller, colder, more suffocating than ever. The muffled sounds of music and laughter from upstairs seemed to press down on me. I couldn't bear it. I needed air. I slipped out the back basement door, the one that led directly outside, avoiding the main part of the house altogether. It had started to drizzle, a cold, persistent rain that mirrored the dampness in my soul. I pulled my thin coat tighter and just started walking, aimlessly, through the unfamiliar suburban streets. After about 15 minutes, the drizzle turned into a steady downpour. Seeking shelter, I noticed lights on in a low brick building ahead. A sign near the entrance read, "Oakwood Community Center, Senior Coffee Hour, Thursdays, 7 p.m. It was Thursday. It was just past 7. Hesitantly, feeling exposed and utterly out of place, I pushed open the door. The warmth and the low hum of conversation washed over me. Several small tables were occupied by people whose hair was mostly gray, like mine. They were chatting, laughing, sipping coffee from styrofoam cups. A woman with kind eyes and a cloud of snowy white hair looked up as I hovered near the doorway, dripping onto the worn linoleum. "Come on in out of the rain, dear," she called warmly. "There's plenty of coffee." She gestured to an empty chair at her table. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, shedding my wet coat. As she introduced herself as Martha Johnson and asked me with genuine interest, "Are you new to the area? Or maybe visiting family?" I found myself wanting to answer honestly. When Martha, a woman with a welcoming smile, asked me, "Are you living with your children too?" I could not have guessed that my truthful, quiet reply would crack open a door I never knew existed. I certainly could not have imagined that within a year, I, the woman who felt she had lost everything, would become the person dozens of other seniors turned to, searching for a lifeline. Settling into that chair at Martha's table felt like surfacing for air after being held underwater. The coffee was weak, The cookies were store-bought, but the simple act of being seen, of being spoken to with kindness, felt like a miracle. I didn't pour out my whole sob story right away, but I admitted I was living with my daughter, temporarily, and that things were challenging. Martha just nodded understandingly. "It's not always easy, is it?" she said gently. Combining households again at our age. Over the next few weeks, the Thursday coffee hour at the community center became my sanctuary. It was the one place I didn't feel invisible. The one place I didn't have to pretend not to exist. Listening to the others, I started to realize my situation wasn't unique. There was Agnes, whose son sold her house out from under her and moved her into a tiny room in his already crowded home. There was Frank, whose retirement community had raised its fees so high he could no longer afford it, forcing him to live with a nephew who resented his presence. Story after story echoed my own feelings of displacement, financial insecurity, and the quiet indignity of becoming dependent. We were the hidden casualties of rising costs, inadequate pensions, and sometimes families who simply didn't have the space or the grace to care for their aging parents properly. Living in Caroline's basement continued to be a daily exercise in swallowing my pride. Privacy was non-existent. I had to schedule my laundry around their needs, tiptoe through the upstairs hallway to use the main bathroom when theirs was occupied, and carefully measure my use of electricity, knowing Richard was scrutinizing the bills. My Social Security check, once meant for modest comforts, now barely covered the rent and food charges Caroline presented me with each month, leaving almost nothing for personal needs or the occasional small pleasure. The gratitude I tried to feel for having a roof over my head warred constantly with the humiliation of my circumstances. I felt trapped, like a bird in a gilded cage. Only my cage was damp concrete, and the bars were made of familial obligation and unspoken resentment. One evening, after a particularly tense dinner, where Richard had loudly complained about the rising cost of property taxes and hinted broadly about the affordability of government-run nursing homes, I returned to the community center feeling lower than ever. Martha noticed my distress immediately. "What's wrong, Gloria?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I finally let it all spill out. The Ponzi scheme, selling my home, the basement, being charged for food, the constant feeling of being a burden, Richard's unsubtle pressure to move me into assisted living. Martha, a retired nurse with a lifetime of listening patiently, just held my hand while I spoke, her touch warm and steadying. When I finished, voice thick with unshed tears, she squeezed my hand. "Gloria," she said firmly, "you are not a burden. You're a victim of circumstance and a victim of fraud, and you are not alone. Look around this room." She was right. As I looked at the familiar faces, I saw not just shared hardship, but also resilience. These were people who had raised families, worked hard, contributed to society. They deserved better than uncertainty and disrespect in their later years. A flicker of my old self, the school principal who organized parent-teacher associations and navigated complex budgets, began to stir within me. "Maybe," I said slowly, the idea forming as I spoke. "Maybe we could help each other. Share information, resources, maybe even find ways to live more affordably together?" Martha's eyes lit up. "That's a wonderful idea, Gloria. With your background in organization, you'd be perfect to lead something like that." The idea took root. It felt purposeful, something I could do, something that mattered. But Caroline's reaction was swift and negative. I'd casually mentioned starting a small discussion group at the center during one of our rare, brief conversations in the kitchen. "A discussion group?" she'd repeated, her perfectly plucked eyebrows rising. "About what?" "Well," I began hesitantly, "about housing challenges for seniors, financial resources, that sort of thing." There are quite a few people at the center facing difficulties. Caroline's expression hardened. Mom, please don't go airing our family's dirty laundry in public. It's embarrassing. People will think we aren't taking care of you. Her voice dropped, taking on a warning edge. I really don't think it's appropriate. And frankly, if you make things awkward for us, living here, well, it might not be sustainable. The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Cause trouble, and you'll lose even this miserable basement. Her words chilled me, but they also ignited a spark of defiance. Why should I be ashamed? Why should I stay silent when so many others were suffering? Around the same time, I met Bernard Cohen at the community center. He was a tall, slightly stooped man with sharp eyes behind thick glasses. He introduced himself as a retired lawyer specializing in housing and elder law. When I mentioned my tentative idea for a support group, his interest was immediate. It's desperately needed, Gloria, he said, his voice rumbling with conviction. So many seniors are being exploited, losing their homes through predatory loans, rent gouging, or simply falling through the cracks. They often don't know their rights or where to turn. He shared stories that made my own situation seem almost fortunate in comparison. Seniors facing eviction with nowhere to go, others trapped in unsafe living conditions. Richard's passive-aggressive suggestions about nursing homes suddenly felt more menacing. Was that my future if I didn't find a way out? The fear was real, a cold knot in my stomach. But fear could be a motivator. Caroline's disapproval and Richard's veiled threats, combined with Bernard's stark assessment of the broader problem, solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about me anymore. I thought about my 35 years in education, organizing schedules, managing staff, communicating with parents, finding resources. Those skills hadn't vanished just because my savings had. With renewed determination, I approached the director of the public library. Remembering my years collaborating with them on literacy programs for my students, I proposed hosting a formal weekly support group there. It offered a neutral, accessible space away from the community center's sometimes chaotic social hour. The director, Mr. Henderson, remembered me fondly and readily agreed, offering a quiet meeting room free of charge. With Martha enthusiastically agreeing to help coordinate and Bernard offering pro bono legal advice clinics during our meetings, our little group began to take shape. We printed simple flyers, posted notices at the community center, local churches, and grocery stores. The first meeting, held on a Tuesday afternoon, drew 12 people. The second, 20. By the fifth meeting, we had over 35 seniors regularly attending, crammed into the library's meeting room. We weren't just talking anymore. We were sharing practical tips, navigating Social Security benefits, finding roommate matching services for seniors, identifying affordable grocery options, accessing transportation programs. Bernard explained tenants' rights and warned about common scams targeting the elderly. Martha, drawing on her nursing background, shared information on local health clinics and wellness programs. People started bringing potluck dishes to share. A real sense of community began to blossom in that small library room. We helped 2 women find compatible roommates to share an apartment, splitting the rent and chores. Another man, facing eviction, found temporary shelter through a church connection someone shared. Small victories, but they felt monumental. I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced since retiring. Organizing the meetings, researching resources, connecting people, it felt like teaching again, but on a different scale. Even the basement felt a little less oppressive when I returned, my mind buzzing with ideas and the satisfaction of having made a small difference. As our group grew, attracting more people each week, and word spread about the successful roommate pairings and resource sharing, a thought began to crystallize in my mind. While Caroline saw me merely as a problem needing management, perhaps, just perhaps, I was actually part of a solution that thousands of seniors, feeling just as lost and invisible as I had, were desperately searching for. The seed of something much bigger than a weekly support group had been planted. Have you or a loved one ever faced challenges with housing as you got older? Please share your experience in the comments below. Sometimes, just knowing we are not alone in these struggles can give us the strength to find solutions and support each other. Please do not forget to like this video and subscribe if you have not already. The energy in our library meetings was palpable now. It wasn't just about commiserating anymore. It was about action. We were brainstorming, networking, pooling our collective knowledge and experience. We started calling ourselves the Silver Linings Group, a name Martha suggested, reflecting our hope amidst the challenges. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. A man I hadn't seen before attended our meeting. He sat quietly in the back, listening intently. He was younger than most of us, perhaps early 60s, dressed in a sharp suit that looked out of place amidst our more casual attire. During the open sharing portion, he introduced himself as David Rodriguez, a local real estate developer. The room grew quiet, a flicker of suspicion in some eyes. Developers weren't usually seen as allies in the fight for affordable housing. But David's story silenced the skepticism. "My mother," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "spent her last year in a state-run facility after losing her apartment. The care was inadequate. The place was depressing. She deserved better." He paused, looking around the room, meeting our eyes. "I've been successful in my business, but that experience left a mark. I want to create better housing options for seniors in our community. Something affordable, supportive, and dignified. I came here today because I heard you folks were tackling this issue head-on, and I want to understand the real needs." He then mentioned something that made my heart beat faster. "There's an old motel on the edge of town, the Crestview Inn. It's been vacant for years, structurally sound, but needs a complete overhaul. I've been looking into acquiring it, but converting it to affordable senior housing is tricky with zoning and funding. Frankly, it makes more sense financially if I partner with a non-profit organization. They can access grants and tax credits that a private developer like me can't." A non-profit organization. The words hung in the air. Partnering with a developer, converting a whole building. It sounded audacious, almost impossible. But the image of the Crestview Inn, repurposed into dozens of safe, affordable apartments for people like Agnes, Frank, and myself, it was a powerful vision. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay on my narrow cot in the basement, the familiar scent of mildew suddenly less noticeable than the frantic buzzing in my mind. Could we really do this? Me? A 75-year-old woman living in her daughter's basement, dependent on Social Security, a victim of financial fraud? The old insecurities whispered doubts. Who was I to think I could start a nonprofit, manage a major development project? Failure seemed not just possible, but probable. The weight of responsibility felt immense. What if I led all these hopeful people down a dead end? What if I failed them, just as I felt I had failed myself? Then I remembered Arthur's voice, clear as if he were sitting beside me. Years ago, when I'd hesitated about applying for the principal position, worried I wasn't qualified enough, he'd said, "Gloria, education doesn't just happen in the classroom. Leadership is about seeing a need and having the courage to try and fill it." Seeing a need, courage to try. The fear didn't vanish, but something shifted within me. A quiet resolve settled in its place. This wasn't about me proving anything. It was about the need I saw reflected in the faces at our meetings every week. It was about creating something lasting, something that offered the dignity and security that had been stripped away from so many of us, including myself. I realized then that my experiences, the loss, the humiliation, living in this basement, weren't just scars. They were my credentials. I understood the problem intimately. Who better to help find a solution? The next morning, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I called Bernard Cohen first. "Bernard," I said, my voice steady, "I think we need to become official. A real nonprofit organization. There's an opportunity, a big one." I explained about David Rodriguez and the Crestview Inn. Bernard listened patiently, asking sharp, practical questions. By the end of the call, he was fully on board. "It's ambitious, Gloria," he said, a note of excitement in his voice. "But it's exactly what this community needs. I'll start working on the incorporation paperwork immediately. We'll need a board of directors, bylaws, a mission statement." Next, I called Martha. Her reaction was pure enthusiasm. "Oh, Gloria, that's wonderful! A proper organization. We can do so much more." She immediately volunteered to help recruit board members from our group and handle communications. Then came the hardest part. I needed to reach out to my old network. 35 years in education meant I knew people, former colleagues, parents who had become community leaders, contacts at local foundations I'd worked with on school projects. Swallowing my pride, I started making calls, explaining my situation briefly, and then pivoting to the urgent need for senior housing and the vision for our new organization. It was humbling, admitting my own vulnerability, but necessary. To my surprise, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People remembered me, respected my past work, and were moved by the cause. Pledges of support, offers of expertise, and connections to potential donors started trickling in. We decided on a name: Silver Alliance. It sounded strong, collaborative, hopeful. Bernard filed the incorporation papers. We formed an initial board with Martha, Bernard, myself, and 2 other dedicated members from our group. We drafted a mission statement focused on creating and supporting affordable, community-based housing solutions for seniors. Then, armed with our newly minted nonprofit status, pending final approval, Bernard and I met with David Rodriguez again. We presented our plan, our board structure, and the initial pledges of support we'd gathered. David was impressed. He agreed to move forward with purchasing the Crestview Inn, contingent on Silver Alliance securing the necessary grants and community funding to partner on the renovation and operation. It felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. We had taken the leap. We had formed an organization, forged a partnership, and set our sights on a tangible, ambitious goal. The path ahead was daunting, filled with fundraising challenges, bureaucratic hurdles, and the sheer logistics of converting a derelict motel. But for the first time since losing everything, I felt not like a victim adrift, but like an architect beginning to draw the blueprints for a better future. Not just for myself, but for many others. The news, however, did not sit well at home. I hadn't explicitly told Caroline about forming a nonprofit, knowing her likely reaction. But one evening, she came down the basement stairs holding a copy of the local newspaper, her face tight with anger. A small article on page 3 mentioned the formation of Silver Alliance, listing me, Gloria Reynolds, as the founder and interim executive director, and briefly described the potential Crestview Inn project. "What is this, Mom?" she demanded, waving the paper. "Silver Alliance, interim executive director? Are you seriously trying to run some kind of charity while you're living off us in our basement?" The accusation hung heavy in the damp air. The familiar shame washed over me, but this time, it was mixed with a new, steely resolve. I could have told her about the progress, the support, the hope. I could have told her that this was my way out, my path back to independence. But looking at her pinched, angry face, I knew she wouldn't understand. Not yet. So, I simply met her gaze and nodded slowly. Yes, Caroline, I am. The unspoken promise hung between us. I wouldn't be in her basement forever. My work, fueled by the very hardship she seemed to resent, was my ticket out, and my determination had never been stronger. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Founding Silver Alliance and partnering with David Rodriguez had unleashed an avalanche of work, but also an incredible surge of energy within our group. We threw ourselves into grant writing, community fundraising events, and developing the operational plan for the Crestview Inn conversion, which we decided to rename Maple Street Commons, a nod to the home I had lost, a symbol of the community we hoped to build. It was exhausting, demanding work, especially juggling it while still living under Caroline and Richard's disapproving roof. But the progress was exhilarating. After countless hours spent writing proposals and making presentations, Silver Alliance secured its first major grant, $500,000 from a prominent local foundation dedicated to elder care. News of this success attracted smaller donations, and soon, individual checks started arriving from former colleagues, church groups, and even strangers who read about our mission in the paper. Combined with David Rodriguez's own significant investment and expertise in managing the construction, the renovation of the old motel began in earnest within 6 months of our initial meeting. Seeing the dusty carpets ripped out, new walls framed, and ADA-compliant bathrooms installed was incredibly validating. We weren't just dreaming anymore. We were building. Simultaneously, recognizing the immediate need for income among our members, I worked with Martha to launch a pilot program we called Grandparents' Wisdom. The concept was simple: connect reliable, experienced seniors from our group with younger families in the community who needed affordable, trustworthy childcare or tutoring. Lisa Thornton, a young single mother struggling to balance work and her 2 small children, was our first match. She needed after-school help, and Helen, one of our members and a retired kindergarten teacher like myself, needed supplemental income. It was a perfect fit. The program quickly gained traction through word of mouth, providing not just much-needed income for our seniors, but also invaluable intergenerational connections and support for local families. Just as Maple Street Commons was nearing completion, 40 bright, accessible studio and 1-bedroom apartments, a communal kitchen and dining area, activity rooms, and even space for a small community garden. The storm broke, and it came, predictably, from Caroline. She had somehow found out about the board's decision to allocate one of the first apartments at Maple Street Commons to me. It was a logical decision. I was the founder, the driving force, and my own housing insecurity was the catalyst for the entire project. Furthermore, living on site would allow me to oversee the initial phase of operations, but Caroline saw it differently. She confronted me one evening, her voice trembling with fury. "So, this entire thing was just a scheme for you to get a brand new, subsidized apartment?" she accused, her face flushed. "Using donated money, leveraging your sob story?" "Caroline, that's not fair," I tried to explain. "The board made the decision based on the organization's needs and my current situation, which you are well aware of. It's completely transparent." "Transparent? It looks like self-dealing," she spat back. "I can't believe you'd embarrass us like this." It didn't stop there. A few days later, Bernard Cohen received a letter from Caroline's lawyer. She was formally contesting my position on the board and my eligibility for housing, alleging lack of capacity due to my age and previous financial misfortune and implying misuse of funds. She even contacted several board members directly, trying to sow seeds of doubt about my leadership and motives. Simultaneously, Richard escalated his campaign. telling me bluntly that if I didn't resign from Silver Alliance and withdraw my application for an apartment, they would have no choice but to ask me to leave their home immediately. Eviction. The word hung in the air, cold and terrifying. For a moment, I felt the ground give way beneath me. After everything I had worked for, everything we had built, could my own daughter destroy it all? Could she really turn me out onto the street just as I was on the verge of securing not only my own home, but homes for dozens of others? The basement suddenly felt colder, damper, more like a prison than ever before. Doubt, sharp and piercing, returned. Had I been naive? Was Caroline right? Was I just fooling myself? This felt like the lowest point, the moment where all the progress could unravel, leaving me truly homeless and defeated. The weight of her accusations, combined with the very real threat of being kicked out, pressed down on me, threatening to extinguish the flicker of hope I had so carefully nurtured. But the darkness didn't last. My board, composed of sensible, compassionate individuals like Martha and Bernard, and others who intimately understood the challenges we were addressing, rallied around me. They called an emergency meeting, without me present, initially, to discuss Caroline's allegations. Bernard, drawing on his legal expertise and unwavering belief in our mission, systematically refuted each claim. Martha spoke passionately about my vision, dedication, and the countless unpaid hours I had poured into Silver Alliance while living in difficult circumstances. Others shared how the organization had already changed their lives. The vote of confidence was unanimous and resounding. Bernard then drafted a firm, legally precise response to Caroline's lawyer, asserting the board's full support for my leadership and eligibility, outlining the transparent processes followed, and warning them against further interference with a registered nonprofit organization's operations. He also sent a separate, carefully worded letter to Richard, reminding him of potential legal repercussions for wrongful eviction, especially given my age and documented contributions to the household finances, however coerced. The community, too, became my shield. When whispers of the conflict reached the members of our original support group, they were outraged. Several wrote letters to the editor of the local paper, praising Silver Alliance's work and my leadership. Lisa Thornton, the first mother helped by grandparents' wisdom, organized other families to voice their support. Caroline and Richard's attempt to isolate and discredit me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of crumbling, Silver Alliance emerged stronger, more unified. With the internal crisis averted, we focused on the final push to open Maple Street Commons. The first 40 apartments were allocated through a fair lottery system, prioritizing those with the greatest need and longest waiting times. We established the skills bank concept I had envisioned. Residents could volunteer a certain number of hours each month, contributing their skills, gardening, cooking, tutoring, minor repairs, organizing activities, in exchange for a reduction in their already affordable rent. This fostered not just cost savings, but a powerful sense of mutual support and shared ownership within the community. Grandparents' wisdom continued to expand, with 25 seniors now earning regular income and building meaningful relationships with local families. The day finally arrived. David Rodriguez handed me the keys to apartment 101 at Maple Street Commons. It was a modest one-bedroom unit, but it felt like a palace. Sunlight streamed through the large window, illuminating the freshly painted walls. It had a small, fully accessible kitchen, a private bathroom, and even a little balcony overlooking the nascent community garden where residents were already planting tomatoes and herbs. As I stood there, keys clutched tightly in my hand, tears streamed down my face. Not tears of sadness or relief from escaping the basement, though that was part of it. These were tears of profound gratitude and accomplishment. 18 months. 18 months ago, I was pretending not to exist in my daughter's basement. Today, I had a home. More importantly, We had created a home for 40 other seniors who desperately needed one. Looking out the window, I saw a small group gathering near the entrance. The first batch of applicants waiting to be interviewed for the next phase of development, another building we were already planning. In that moment, watching them, I knew. This wasn't just about my survival. What we had started here, born from my own loss and humiliation, was going to grow far beyond me, offering hope and dignity to countless others for years to come. 4 years. It felt like both a lifetime and the blink of an eye since that first tentative step into the Oakwood Community Center. Silver Alliance wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. We now manage 3 vibrant Maple Street Commons communities, housing over 200 seniors who would otherwise be struggling. Our operating budget, fueled by a combination of grants, private donations, successful social enterprises like Grandparents' Wisdom, and the innovative Skills Bank program, had reached $2.3 million annually. David Rodriguez had become a committed partner, helping us identify and develop 2 more properties, leveraging his expertise for the social good he believed in. Martha was our indispensable volunteer coordinator, Bernard, our wise legal counsel on the board, and our original Silver Linings Group members formed the backbone of our resident councils and support networks. Living in Maple Street Commons was everything I had hoped it would be, and more. It wasn't just affordable housing, it was a true community. We shared meals in the dining hall, tended the garden together, organized book clubs, movie nights, and exercise classes. Residents looked out for one another, sharing groceries, offering rides, providing companionship. The Skills Bank fostered incredible collaboration. Retired electricians fixed lamps, former accountants helped neighbors with taxes, passionate knitters made blankets for new grandchildren. It was a place buzzing with life, purpose, and mutual respect. Sitting on my small balcony one evening, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple, I had a moment of quiet realization. The financial ruin, the gut-wrenching loss of my home, the humiliation of the basement, those devastating events hadn't been the end of my story. They were the crucible that had forged a new beginning. Losing everything had, paradoxically, freed me to discover what truly mattered: connection, community, and the profound satisfaction of making a tangible difference in the lives of others who shared my struggles. It had led me to a purpose far greater than simply managing my own comfortable retirement. My mother, a practical woman who faced her own share of hardships, used to say, "The best way to measure your own worth is to look at what you have done for others." And at 79 years old, living in a community I helped build, surrounded by people I cared about and who cared about me, I finally, truly understood what she meant. Silver Alliance's success began attracting wider attention. Articles appeared not just locally, but in national publications focusing on aging and housing solutions. I found myself invited to speak at conferences, sharing our model with organizations in other cities looking to replicate our success. It was surreal, standing at podiums, addressing rooms full of policymakers and advocates, knowing that just a few years prior, I had felt utterly invisible. For the grand opening of our 3rd and largest community, a beautifully renovated former school building, ironically, we planned a major event. It was a celebration not just of the new building, but of everything Silver Alliance represented. There would be local dignitaries, press coverage, and of course, our residents and supporters. As I prepared the invitation list, I hesitated when I came to Caroline and Richard's names. Our relationship remained strained, polite but distant. After the failure of her attempt to discredit me, Caroline had largely withdrawn, offering occasional, stilted phone calls, but little else. Richard remained entirely silent. Yet, something compelled me to extend the invitation. Not out of obligation, but perhaps out of a desire for closure, or maybe just a quiet statement of how far I had come. I took one of the formal invitation cards and wrote a personal note on the back. It wasn't accusatory or triumphant, just simple fact. Dear Caroline, I wrote, I wanted to personally invite you and Richard to the opening of our newest community. It feels like a long time ago now, but I wanted to thank you. Thank you for giving me a basement to start over in. Because of that difficult time, I can now help ensure others don't have to face the same uncertainty. I sealed the envelope and mailed it, unsure if I would even receive a reply. The day of the grand opening was bright and sunny. The renovated school building looked magnificent, filled with excited residents, volunteers, and guests. As I stood near the entrance, greeting people, I felt a familiar pang of nervousness mixed with deep pride. Then, I saw her. Caroline. She was standing alone near the edge of the crowd, looking smaller, somehow, than I remembered. Richard was not with her. She approached me hesitantly, her eyes scanning the vibrant scene. Seniors chatting animatedly, children from a local daycare, part of our intergenerational program, laughing, the mayor preparing to speak. Mom, she said, her voice unusually subdued. This is amazing, what you've built. We built it, I corrected gently. It took a whole community. We stood in silence for a moment, the festive noise swirling around us. Then Caroline looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. You were right, Mom, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. About everything. Richard and I, we're separating. Turns out, he treats me much the same way we treated you when things get difficult. The confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. There was no triumph in that moment, no, I told you so. Only a wave of sadness for my daughter's pain, mingled with a quiet understanding. I simply reached out and put my arm around her shoulders. Oh, Caroline, I said softly. I'm so sorry. After a moment, I added, You know, I have a guest room in my apartment now. It's small, but it's always there if you need a place to land for a little while. She didn't reply, just leaned into the embrace for a brief second before straightening up, a flicker of gratitude in her tear-filled eyes. It wasn't a magic fix, but it felt like the first crack in the wall that had stood between us for so long. Later that day, as I stood at the podium sharing the story of Silver Alliance, looking out at the sea of faces, residents, supporters, volunteers, even my daughter standing quietly in the back, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My life hadn't followed the path I'd planned, but perhaps it had followed the path I needed. I had lost my savings, my house, my sense of security. But in the process, I had found my voice, my purpose, and a new definition of home. Not just as bricks and mortar, but as a community built on dignity, respect, and mutual support. Life doesn't end when you lose the things you thought defined you. Sometimes, that's precisely when you discover who you truly are and what you are truly capable of giving. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. It means the world to me to share it with you. If it resonated with you in any way, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel so you will not miss the powerful stories still to come. Remember, no matter your age or circumstances, it is never too late to rewrite your narrative, to find your purpose, and to make a difference, not just for yourself, but for those around you. I am Gloria Reynolds, and I look forward to sharing another story with you soon. Goodbye for now.